In this lecture, we are going to style our website to look nicer. Before we jump into this video, go to training.mammothinteractive.com. Here you can sign up for the Mammoth Unlimited membership and get access to all of the courses we've ever created. That's over 2,000 hours of content. So all styling is done inside of a CSS file. So that's why we had style.css, which we created way at the beginning of this very course in this project. All right, so in here we can put in our styles using CSS. If you've done any kind of web design before, then you'll know CSS. So what we need to do here is specify which HTML tags or CSS classes or IDs we want to style. For example, we can style the entire body just by referencing the body and then opening curly brackets. So this is referring to the HTML body tag. So the body tag is what contains all of our code, and we can find it. It begins inside of the header file. That is where the body is opened up. All right, so here we already are referencing a WordPress class on the body for some default WordPress styling and just so that WordPress knows where our body is. And as well, we then have that body tag. So this is an HTML tag, and we can reference that in the CSS just by calling its name. Then inside of the curly brackets is where we put all of the styles that we want for the body. For example, we could change the color of our body. This refers to the font color. So we could change this to red. This is the syntax for making a change in a CSS file. You have the name of the property you want to change, followed by a colon. Then you have the value for the property, followed by a semicolon. So make sure you follow this syntax. If you want to add more properties, you just make a new line and repeat. Okay, so now we can save our file, and if you go to your localhost, you might expect for the font color to change or for something to look red. But there's no changes because we have to actually specify that we want this CSS file, our style.css, to be the CSS file that WordPress uses, or at least one of them, because you can have multiple. So we have to create another file where we specifically state that we want to load the CSS file. Now we could do this directly inside of our header file with HTML. We could load in the CSS file here via the head tag. But to keep things more organized, it's better to store all of your loading of files, like loading CSS files or loading other files, inside of a separate file. So for that, join me in your terminal or command prompt. Here we are going to enter our project folder, which has our theme, the Hello World theme. So I'm now inside of my Hello World theme folder. In here, I'm going to create a new file with Notepad if you are on Windows, or use Touch if you're on Mac. And you can use, of course, just manual creation of the file as well if you want to just create it manually. The file will be called functions.php. Great, now let's open the file with a code editor. Here I am inside of functions.php now, and here we're going to write some PHP code to load our CSS file as part of our website. So we didn't have to do this with other files like the header, the footer, the index, but we do have to do it for a CSS file. So here we're going to open up the PHP tag, and we don't have to close it because all we're writing is just PHP, so the closing will be implied, but you could close it if you wanted to. Then here we're going to call WP for WordPress onQ_style. So this function is going to allow you to load a CSS file or some kind of style file where you're storing all of your styling. And you can have multiple that you load in as well if you want to separate your files. There's a separate function called WP WordPress _onQ_scripts, which is for loading scripts. So that's more of site functionality. WP OnQ style is specifically for loading a style sheet. So we have to pass in several arguments here. First is the name of the style sheet. Ours was style, and then the .css is implied for cascading style sheet. Then we need the source of where is this actual file. So for that, we are going to use get template directory URI, which gives me the path to my template directory. So this is just my theme folder, my Hello World theme project folder. Then we can add a dot, and that is in order to add or concatenate two strings together. So we're going to concatenate the path to our project folder with style or slash style.css. So what we are doing here is we're just passing in the path to our style.css file, and we're doing it with the absolute path because we are getting the path of our entire folder and then adding style.css. Our next argument to pass in is whether or not this style sheet is dependent on another style sheet. That will set to false because we don't have any other style sheet. If you did want your style sheet to be dependent on another style sheet, you would have to load in the parent first and then load in the dependent. Next up, we have to pass in a version number as a string. I'm going to use version 1.1. And one more argument we need is to specify which type of media can load this style sheet, such as all media, screen media, print media, handheld media. So you can specify where you want the style sheet to be applied. And we're going to say all, which means we'll allow our style sheet to be loaded in screen, print, and handheld. All right, so those are our arguments. We can fix up the indentation just a little bit to make this easier to read. All right, and we can fix it up even more as well. Actually, not required, but just makes it a little bit easier and more organized, a little cleaner for us to look at. Okay, so those are our arguments. Now, that is all we need in order to load our style sheet. So now we can save the file, and if we refresh your page, look at this. Now all of our text is red except for links. Links by default will be blue because that's what specifies that they are a link. So we've been able to change the color. Now I'm not going to leave it like this, but you've been able to change the style of your site. Awesome. Okay, now let's go back into style.css. Now we can add more styles and everything will be applied. So I'm going to not change the color to red. The default color is black. I will, however, change the font family. Okay, this is another property, font family. And what this property does is it allows you to change which font you're using. So you may be familiar with Helvetica. That is a type of font. So you can specify what font you're using. By default, the font is Times New Roman. If I refresh now, look at this. Well, I changed my color back to the default, and also now the font style or font family, to be specific, is Helvetica. All right, so this is a better font for the web because for the web it's better to use sans serif fonts than serif fonts. Serif fonts are where, let's see, I can put it back. They are where you have small little ticks on the top and bottom and even potentially the sides of the font. So I could change this back to Times and then refresh. Okay, and you can see this is a serif font because it has little things on the left and right and sometimes the top and bottom. So this is better for print because it's easier to read on paper, but this is harder to read on the web. So for the web, it's better to use sans serif fonts like Helvetica. And rather than just specifying Helvetica, you also want to add a backup font because sometimes Helvetica won't load in a certain browser or on a certain phone. So instead you need to have a backup, which will be sans-serif, which will just take the sans serif font that does work on the device. Okay, now you can refresh and you'll see we have still Helvetica because this browser supports Helvetica on this computer. Awesome. Okay, so we've been able to change the font family. Okay, next up, let's take each blog post that we have 3 posts, and let's put an outline around the post. So for that, we're going to go back into our code editor. Inside of our index, we can see all of our blog posts. So here we have a title and content of each blog post, as well as a button to read more. Now let's put all of this content into a group, a container, instead of just having it be on its own on the page. So for that, inside of index.php, I'm just going to add a new tag here called an article. And this tag is great for when you have a blog article on the page, because remember, HTML is for defining what elements are. If you want to style the elements, you do that with CSS. You shouldn't do it with HTML where possible. All right, then we are going to end the article with a closing article tag. So we'll put all of the post content into the article tag. And let's just add indentation as well. Now, if you go into your browser, you won't see any change because we just changed what an object is, and that usually won't change the appearance unless that HTML object has a default styling, like an anchor tag or a div. But here we have an article. All right, so now that our post is inside of a group HTML tag, we can style the whole group at once. So inside of style.css, I'm going to reference the article HTML tag this time. And here for each article, I'm going to set an outline property. For the outline, this will create an outline, as you can imagine. There's also a property called a border, which is a slight variation on outline. For the outline, we have to set several values. And for that, we're going to first set the width of the outline, so how thick it is. I'll do 5 pixels. Then the type of outline, I'll do solid. There's also dashed and wavy and more. As well, we can pass in a color here. So let's choose a gray color. We use a hex color code for that, such as E6EAEB. Now, every color on the web can be represented as a hex color code. Also, there's another format known as the RGB code. Here we're using hex. It's a little more convenient in this case. And this is the color of a light gray. And you can search up the hex code for any color that you want to represent. Let's save our file and then refresh our page, and look at this. Now, each of our blog posts has a little box around it. Okay, so we have an outline. Now, currently, that outline is quite close here to our text, so let's give the outline a bit of an offset. For that, I'll go back into my code. And here inside of my CSS, I'm going to set a property outline-offset. Now, CSS has many properties, as you can imagine, and you can search up any property that you want to change on the web. If you want to change an outline, you can just search up how to change an outline in CSS, because there are so many properties out there. Of course, over time, you'll start to memorize some of them. All right, now here for our outline offset, this represents how much of padding we want between the content of the article and the outline of the article. So we could use a hard-coded value here like 5 pixels, or we could use something like 1 EM. This EM, it stands for the size of the font, so the size of one letter in a font. And using something like EM is better for responsivity, because let's say someone is looking at your web page on a mobile phone, well then the outline offset of 5 pixels might actually be too big. Whereas if they're watching it on a huge screen, then 5 pixels might be too small. So instead we use relative sizing, like 1 EM, where EM is the size of the font on that current device, because the size of a font is going to be different on a mobile phone versus a huge screen. There are many other ways to set sizes as well, like percentages, which refer to the percentage of the parent object of whatever object you're currently in. There's also REM as well. Let's just stick to EM for now. And if that is too confusing for you, you can stick to just pixels for now. And then over time, if you want to learn more about CSS, you'll learn a lot more about relative sizing. Let's keep this at 1 EM, so one of the font letters will be the sizing. If we refresh our page, you'll see now there is a bit of some padding around the text. Okay, we can see here we have some padding around the text a little bit. Okay, we can see that for most of the posts. Let's also put some margin around each of the posts because currently they're quite close together. So for that, I'm going to go back into my code editor and I'll set the property margin-bottom. This will set the space between the current object, the article, and whatever is below it, and that is known as the margin bottom. There's margin on all sides. It's the space between objects. So let's use 5 EM for that. Then I'm going to refresh the page and look at that. Now there's a lot more space between my posts, and that's a lot cleaner. You want to use white space wisely on your site and not just throw a million things onto the site. Okay, great. So we have an outline for our posts, and that is looking great. We can also put some padding around our entire body. So let's go back into our code editor, and on the body we can put margin or padding. So margin is the space between elements, whereas padding is the space inside of an element that an element takes up. So it's slightly two different concepts. So for our body, let's just use margin since we've already seen it before. So if you're using a code editor, you'll likely get prompts, and you can see there are many different types of margin. There's margin on all sides. If you want to just set the same value for all 4 sides, top, bottom, left, and right, then you can just use margin instead of something like margin bottom. And let's use 5 EM. So 5 times the size of the letter of a regular default font. We'll refresh the page and look at this. Now there is margin around our whole body. So because we put the style on the body, it styles only the body, which means the margin is only around the whole container instead of around each individual element, which we did for the posts. So that is already looking a lot better. That is looking awesome. All right, now let's change some of the colors on the site. So I'm going to change all of my links here to be a different color. So instead of having my link here be just blue, let's put it on some default dark gray or black color, and then we can give it an underline. So how do we reference all of the links on our page? Well, if you go to your index, you'll remember each link is referenced with an HTML anchor tag. All right, so we can use the anchor tag to be able to style every link on the page instead of having it be that default blue color, which is too harsh. You don't want to use such harsh colors typically. So we can reference the HTML tag with an A, just like we did for our body and our article. Then here we can set a property like the color. So we could change the color here to black. All right, so I've set the property color to black on all of my links. I will refresh my page and look at that. Now all of my links are black. They're still here links. They just are a different color. Let's also change the color of the underline for our links. Instead of leaving that at black, I'm going to set it to an orange color. So here, first I need to specify that I want to add an underline. And here I'm going to set text dash decoration to underline, so that will force the underline. Then I'm going to set the text dash decoration dash color, and I'm going to set it to an orange color using a hex color code F26722. Great, then I can save this, and if I go back to my page, I can see there is an outline. All right, it's now orange. Awesome. Now this is quite a thin outline, so let's make it a bit thicker. For that, I'm going to go back to my code, and here I am going to change the thickness. So I can use text dash decoration dash thickness, and I'm going to set this to 0.3 em. So 1/3 of the size of a letter of font. Great, then I'm going to refresh my page and look at this. Now the underline is a lot thicker. You'll notice that sometimes the underline breaks, and that is due to letters falling a bit lower than the baseline. So you can zoom in and see here the M is perfectly on the baseline of the text, but the A, it dips about a fraction of a millimeter down, it dips. And just that tiny little pixel dip has registered a break in our underline. So we can actually change this to never break like that. For that, I'm going to go back to my code, and I'm going to set the property text dash decoration dash skip dash ink. And I'm going to set this to none, which means we should never skip the underline or text decoration, never skip the text decoration for ink. All right, and this is a newer property. It used to be called something different. So if you find that a property isn't working at any time, it's possible that it may have updated and changed its name. Though that happens rarely, it can happen. All right, so we can save our file and then refresh our page, and look at that. Now our text decoration is not skipping for ink or text. Awesome, that is looking great. One more thing we should do for the underline is this text decoration color. This is for newer browsers only, and Safari doesn't have support for it yet. And you'll often find this if you start to use newer CSS properties, because new ones do get created every year. Some older browsers might not actually support them until some time down the line. So for support on Safari, we have to add -webkit text decoration color and set that to our orange color. All right, there we go. And the reason being that Safari does not understand text decoration color. Safari does understand, however, WebKit text decoration color. And that is just until Safari does support this property. So that can happen when you're using newer properties of CSS. It's just the nature of the beast. All right, great. Let's do one more thing before we leave, and that is going to be to change our colors to be variables, because currently we just have a bunch of hex color codes, and this can be really confusing for developers who look at your code, because developers usually don't know exactly what a hex color code is unless they have worked with it before. Because if there's a hex color code that's just this, it's really hard to understand that that is orange, and you don't want to have to keep typing that as well. So let's make a variable instead to represent these colors. For that, I am going to here create a new reference called :root, and this allows me to set variables inside of my CSS. A variable is a way to store data. So I want to store data about this hex color code. I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it --orange. This is the syntax for creating a variable in CSS. That I'm going to paste the hex color code for my orange color. Then from now on, instead of using the hex color code directly, I can instead use var and then in parentheses --orange. That is the syntax for referencing a variable that you created. And we can do that for any time that we use that hex color code for orange. You can save your file and go back to your browser and see nothing has broken. The variables are valid. We can do the same with our gray color. Remember, we had a gray color for our articles. Let's just move the root to be a bit higher then. Typically, you would actually put the root at the very top. All right, so all your variables are at the top. And let's just create another variable for gray. So I'm going to create dash dash gray, and I'm going to paste the hex color code we used for the gray outline for our articles. Then whenever we want to use that variable, we just have to use var and in parentheses dash dash gray. Awesome, so now we have reusable hex color codes that will be a lot easier to understand. Otherwise, it's very easy to forget which hex color code is which color because there are so many colors out there and so many hex color codes. All right, so we can test out our site again. We can click on links, go back to links, and awesome, look at that. Everything is working still. All our pages are still valid. And now we also have some awesome styling on the site. Now pay attention to detail because you may notice that we still have here a HR line break for the header. So we may want to remove that because now it's kind of conflicting with the post. So let's go back to our code, and inside of the header here, let's go ahead and remove our HR line break wherever we had that. Let's see. We have our title. Okay, then we have the body. Great, there's the body. Aha, then we had this HR. We'll delete that. Okay, then we can refresh our page. Just give it a moment to update. It can take some time because it is being hosted on a server, which has to catch up. So MAMP just has to catch up. Then we'll see our change because we removed that HR line break. All right, so as I wait for this to change, I will recap what we did. In this lecture, we learned how to add styles to our site. So we were able to style the body, posts, and links. Now, when we remove the HR, we can see that there has now been less of a space created, but we can add the space back in with CSS. So what we can do is go into our style.css, and here we can reference our header because remember we had this header HTML object. So we can reference this header tag, which contains all of our header information and elements. We can reference that HTML tag, and we can give it a property of margin dash bottom, so the space between this element and other elements on the bottom, and let's set that to 7 em. Then I'm going to refresh my page. Okay, and there's a lot more space created, maybe a little too much space. I can change this to 5 em, and let's go back to our page and refresh. Okay, great, that is looking a lot nicer. So we have our site title and description, and then we have our 3 blog posts, and then we have the footer, and that is looking great. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to go to training.mammothinteractive.com. Here you can sign up for the Mammoth Unlimited membership, where you can get access to over 350 courses that we've created.